The USS Stingray moved slowly through the cold, dark waters of the Pacific Ocean, and Commander Jack Morrison stood in the control room watching his crew work at their stations. The submarine was old and tired after 60 years of service, and in 3 weeks she would be taken to the scrapyard and turned into metal pieces. This final patrol felt strange to Jack because he knew it was the last time he would command this vessel, and the last time this crew would work together on these waters. The green lights from the control panels lit up the faces of the young sailors who worked quietly and professionally, even though they all knew their boat was heading toward retirement. Lieutenant Amy Carter sat at her sonar station and her eyes moved across the screen, watching for any contacts in the water around them. She was good at her job and could identify the sound of a whale from a merchant ship from miles away. Suddenly her face changed and she leaned closer to her screen and listened more carefully to what her equipment was telling her. She pressed her headphones tighter against her ears and checked her readings again before she spoke to the commander. The reading on her screen showed something massive in the water about 5 miles away, and it was not moving at all. Amy checked every database she had but found nothing that matched what she was seeing. The object was huge and it hung in the water at a depth that should have crushed any known submarine or ship. She called out to Commander Morrison and told him about the strange contact, and he walked over to look at her screen. Jack looked at the display and felt a cold feeling in his stomach because he had been in the Navy for 30 years and had never seen anything like this before. He ordered the crew to stop all engines and go to silent running, which meant the submarine would make almost no noise at all. The Stingray became quiet and still in the water like a metal fish, waiting and watching. Chief Petty Officer Dan Harris checked his instruments, and the energy readings he saw made no sense at all, because whatever was out there was putting out power levels that no human machine could produce. The crew waited in silence and watched their screens, and then the object began to move. It went up very fast toward the surface, and when it broke through the water, the sonar picked up a sound like thunder. Jack looked through the periscope and saw something that changed everything he thought he knew about the world. A craft rose out of the ocean and water poured off its surface, and it was covered in strange markings and shapes that looked like nothing built by human hands. The craft moved up into the sky with impossible speed, and Grayson just hung there in the air above the waves. Jack ordered his radio operator to contact the Pacific Fleet immediately because he knew they had just witnessed something that would change human history forever. But when the operator tried to send a message, nothing happened. Every frequency was filled with static and noise, and no signals could get through. The Stingray was alone in the ocean and cut off from the rest of the world, and whatever was happening to them alone. Then the sky began to fill with more craft. They appeared out of nowhere as if they had been invisible and now decided to show themselves. Dozens of ships hung in the air over the ocean, and Jack knew without being told that this was happening all over the world. His mind raced with questions about who they were and what they wanted and whether Earth had any chance against technology like this. The radio suddenly came to life with a voice that spoke perfect English but sounded wrong somehow. The voice was flat and cold, like a machine pretending to be human. It announced that Earth was now part of something called the Krithian Empire, and that resistance would be useless because human weapons were too primitive to fight back. The voice said that if humans surrendered, they would be allowed to live, but if they fought, they would be destroyed. Through the periscope, Jack watched as one of the alien ships fired a blue beam of light at a cargo ship on the horizon. The cargo ship simply vanished in an instant with no explosion and no debris left behind. It was there one moment and gone the next, as if it had never existed at all. Jack felt his hands grip the periscope handles tighter, and he knew that Earth was facing an enemy it could not defeat with conventional weapons. Lieutenant Paul Richards asked what their orders were, and everyone in the control room looked at Jack and waited for him to tell them what to do. Jack looked around at his crew and saw fear in their eyes, but also determination and courage. These were good people who had trained for war but never expected to face something like this. The Stingray carried torpedoes designed to sink ships and submarines, but how could old human weapons fight craft that could vaporize a ship in seconds? But Jack realized something important in that moment. The alien ships had conquered the surface world, but they did not know the Stingray was here. The submarine was invisible to them, hidden in the deep ocean where their sensors could not find her. While the world above was being invaded and conquered, the Stingray remained undetected, like a ghost in the water. Jack made his decision and told his crew they would go completely dark and shut down every system that made noise. They would watch and listen and learn about the enemy. They would wait for the right moment to strike back. Amy asked what moment they were waiting for, and Jack smiled, but his smile was cold and hard. He told her they would wait for the aliens to make a mistake. Because every enemy makes mistakes eventually. The crew understood what he meant, and they went to work preparing the submarine. For a long period of hiding and watching, they knew their air would not last forever, and their food would run out, and eventually they would have to surface or dock somewhere. But for now they were safe in the deep ocean, and they were the only military force on Earth that the aliens did not know existed. That gave them one advantage that might be enough to make a difference in the war that was just beginning. 3 days passed slowly in the dark belly of the USS Stingray, and the crew lived like ghosts beneath the waves. They moved quietly through the narrow corridors and spoke in whispers, and ate cold food from cans because heating anything would create noise that might give away their position. The air was getting stale and thick, and everyone knew that time was running out. Jack Morrison spent hours looking through the periscope and listening to reports from Amy at the sonar station, and slowly they began to understand what had happened to the world above them. The aliens had taken over Earth in less than 3 days. Their ships hung over every major city on the planet, and whenever any military tried to fight back, the aliens destroyed them with their blue energy weapons. Armies surrendered and governments fell, and humanity was defeated so easily it seemed impossible. The creatures that came down from the ships were not like the tall, graceful beings from movies, but were short and covered in armor that made them look like walking machines. Human bullets bounced off them, and human tanks were melted into slag before they could fire a shot. Jack called a meeting in the small wardroom where his officers could barely fit around the tiny table. Amy and Dan and Paul sat down, and their faces looked tired and worried. Dan reported that they had maybe 2 weeks of food and air left, and after that they would have to surface or find a port. But Paul said every port was occupied by aliens and their mechanical soldiers, and if the Stingray tried to dock, they would be captured or killed immediately. Jack spread out his charts and maps on the table and showed the positions of alien ships he had been tracking. He told his officers that they could not fight the aliens on land or in the air, because human technology was too far behind. But submarines had always fought differently from other military forces. Submarines fought from below where they could not be seen, and they struck at weak points and then vanished before the enemy could respond. That was how they would fight this war. Amy frowned and reminded Jack that they had watched an alien ship destroy a cargo vessel in seconds. She asked what made him think their torpedoes could damage ships that powerful. Jack nodded because it was a good question, and he had been thinking about it for 3 days. He explained that he had noticed something important about the alien ships that gave him hope. When the alien craft were in the air or hovering above the ground, they were surrounded by a shimmer in the air like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Jack believed this was some kind of protective shield that stopped weapons from hitting them. But when one of the alien ships went underwater to collect something from the ocean floor, Jack watched it carefully through the periscope. The shimmer around the ship flickered and faded and looked weaker than when it was in the air. He thought maybe the shield did not work as well in water. Paul said that was a lot of guessing and assuming for a plan that could get them all killed. Jack agreed that it was risky, but he pointed out that they were the only military force on Earth that the aliens did not know about. If they did nothing, then nobody would fight back and humanity would be slaves forever. He told his officers that he was not going to order them to fight, because this was probably a suicide mission. Instead, they would vote on what to do. One by one, the officers raised their hands to vote yes for fighting back. Then Jack opened the door and called in the entire crew and explained his plan to all of them. He expected some of them to refuse or to be angry about being asked to die for a plan that might not work. But every single crew member volunteered to fight. Petty Officer Lisa Grant spoke up and said her family was somewhere up on the surface, and if there was any chance to hit back at the aliens, then they had to take it. Jack felt proud of his crew, but also sad because he knew he was probably leading them to their deaths. He studied his charts and his notes and found a pattern in how the aliens operated. One of their ships went underwater near Hawaii every 6 hours like clockwork. It would descend to the ocean floor and collect something, and then rise back up to join the others in the air. That ship would be their target. Amy calculated the best position for an ambush, and Paul checked their torpedoes to make sure they were ready to fire. Dan worked on the engines to squeeze out every bit of speed they might need to escape after the attack. The crew prepared the submarine for battle, and checked every system twice because they would only get one chance, and if anything went wrong, they would die. Jack sat alone in his tiny cabin and wrote letters to the families of his crew. He knew the letters would probably never be delivered because there was no way to get them off the submarine. But he wrote them anyway because it felt important to say goodbye and to explain why they had chosen to fight instead of hiding until they ran out of air. The Stingray moved quietly through the dark water toward the coordinates where the alien ship would appear. The crew was silent at their stations, and the only sounds were the quiet hum of electronics and the distant creaking of the hull under pressure. They reached the position and settled into a trench on the ocean floor and waited. Hours passed slowly, and every minute felt like an hour. Then Amy heard something on her sonar, and her voice was tight with tension as she reported the contact. The alien ship was coming down right on schedule. It was huge and cylindrical, and covered in the strange angular patterns that all their craft had. The ship descended slowly into the water, and the shimmer around it flickered just like Jack had predicted. It reached the bottom and began scraping along the ocean floor, collecting minerals or metals or whatever it was they needed from Earth. Jack watched the range decrease on his screen and felt his heart beating hard in his chest. This was it. One old submarine against an empire that had conquered Earth in 3 days. If they failed, they would be destroyed and nobody would ever know they tried. But if they succeeded, maybe other humans would see that the aliens could be hurt, and maybe the resistance would begin. He gave the order to fire. The first torpedo left the Stingray with a thump that everyone in the submarine could feel through the deck plates beneath their feet. Paul counted 3 seconds and then fired the second torpedo, and now 2 Mark 48 torpedoes were racing through the dark water toward the alien ship. The weapons were old technology designed decades ago to fight Soviet submarines, but they were reliable and powerful, and right now they were the only hope humanity had. Amy watched her sonar screen and tracked the torpedoes as they closed the distance to the target. The alien ship continued working on the ocean floor and seemed unaware that death was coming toward it through the water. Jack held his breath and gripped the edge of the periscope and counted the seconds in his head. Then at the last moment, the alien ship stopped moving and its engines changed pitch. Somehow it had detected the incoming weapons, but by then it was too late to do anything about it. The first torpedo slammed into the hull of the alien ship, right where the energy shield was weakest and flickering. The explosion was massive and sent a shockwave rolling through the ocean that shook the Stingray hard enough to knock loose equipment off shelves. 3 seconds later, the second torpedo hit in almost the same spot and punched through the damaged armor and exploded deep inside the alien vessel. The sonar filled with the sound of tearing metal and breaking machinery, and strange alien screams that were picked up through the water. Amy shouted that they had direct hits and the target was breaking apart. Through the periscope, Jack watched as the alien ship tore itself into pieces and strange green fires burned even underwater. Huge chunks of the vessel spiraled down into the depths and the ocean was filled with debris and wreckage. The mighty Crithian ship that had helped conquer humanity in just days was dying in the cold Pacific waters, killed by a submarine that was older than most of its crew. The control room erupted in cheers, and for a moment the crew forgot their training and hugged each other and celebrated their victory. But Jack quickly brought them back to reality by ordering them to go deep and increase speed. They needed to get away from this location immediately because the aliens would come looking for whoever had destroyed their ship. Amy confirmed his fears by reporting multiple contacts on her sonar. At least 6 alien ships were racing toward their position from different directions. Jack ordered an emergency dive and told Dan to give him every bit of speed the old engines could produce. The Stingray tilted down sharply and dove toward the ocean floor with her reactor pushing power through systems that groaned in protest. The alien ships above began firing into the water blindly, trying to hit whatever had attacked them. The ocean turned into hell as energy beams boiled the water and created massive cavitation bubbles that collapsed with sounds like explosions. The Stingray went deeper. Then she was designed to go in red. Warning lights flickered on across every control panel. Dan worked frantically to keep the reactor stable while the submarine shook and rattled from the pressure. Jack steered them along an underwater ridge that would mask their sonar signature and ordered the crew to shut down everything that was not absolutely necessary. The submarine became as quiet as the dead and drifted through the darkness while the aliens searched for them above. Hours passed like years while the crew waited in the dark and listened to the alien ships hunting for them. The ships fired randomly into the water trying to flush out their attacker, but they could not find the stingray. Submarines were designed to hide, and this old boat knew every trick in the book. They released noisemakers that sounded like submarine engines to draw the aliens away from their true position. They used underwater currents to carry them silently away from the search area. They played dead better than any crew had ever played dead before. Finally, as night fell on the surface, the alien ships gave up their search and departed. Amy reported that all contacts were moving away and the ocean was quiet again. The crew let out breaths they did not know they had been holding and slowly began to relax at their stations. Jack allowed himself a small smile and told his crew they had just killed their first alien ship and now they needed to figure out how to kill. Lisa brought coffee to the control room even though it was cold because heating water would make noise they could not afford. The crew drank it anyway and felt the caffeine wake them up. Paul checked their remaining torpedoes and reported they had 6 left, which meant they could attack 3 more ships if they were lucky. Dan said the reactor was damaged from the deep dive and would need repairs. Before they could do anything else risky, Jack knew they could not stay hidden forever because eventually their supplies would run out and they would have to surface. But for now, they had proven something important to themselves and hopefully to any other humans who might learn about their attack. The aliens were not invincible and their ships could be destroyed by human weapons, if those weapons were used correctly. Over the next few days, the Stingray moved carefully through the Pacific and listened to radio signals when it was safe to do so. They heard fragments of transmissions from other submarines that had survived the invasion. The USS Barracuda was hiding in the Atlantic Ocean. A Russian submarine called Kazan was somewhere in the Arctic. A French submarine named Pearl was operating near Africa. The submarine forces of Earth had not been completely destroyed, and they were beginning to coordinate with each other. Jack realized that submarines all over the world were the only military forces that had survived the invasion intact. The aliens had crushed armies and air forces and destroyed surface ships with ease, but they had not thought about submarines hiding deep underwater where their sensors could not reach. Now those submarines were beginning to fight back, and the aliens were learning that conquering Earth would not be as easy as they thought. The Stingray intercepted a coded message from another submarine asking for confirmation about the destroyed alien ship near Hawaii. Jack sent back a simple message that said yes, it was true and yes, it could be done again. He included information about how the alien shields were weak underwater and how their ships were vulnerable when submerged. This information spread through the surviving submarine fleet and gave hope to crews that had been hiding in despair. Jack held another meeting with his officers and they discussed their next move. They had proven their tactics worked, but one successful attack did not win a war. The aliens still controlled the surface and had thousands of troops occupying cities all over Earth. The submarine fleet needed to do more damage and needed to do it in a way that would inspire human resistance on land. Amy suggested they target the alien supply ships that were carrying resources from Earth up to the larger vessels in orbit. If they could cut off the supply lines, maybe the occupation would become harder to maintain. Paul wanted to coordinate attacks with other submarines so multiple alien ships would be destroyed at the same time. Dan warned that the Stingray could not keep operating at this pace without serious maintenance, and they needed to find a safe place to make repairs. Jack listened to all their ideas and made a decision. They would continue hitting alien ships whenever they found good opportunities, but they would also start looking for a place where the submarine fleet could gather and coordinate their efforts, somewhere deep and remote where the aliens would not think to search. They needed to transform from individual boats fighting alone into an organized resistance force that could really hurt the occupation. The war was just beginning and the Stingray had fired the first shots. Now it was time to teach the aliens that humans did not give up and did not surrender. The ocean was vast and deep and full of places to hide, and submarines were made for this kind of fighting. The Crithian Empire had conquered many worlds, but they had never fought an enemy that lived in the deep water and struck without warning from the darkness below. Word of what the Stingray had done spread through the human resistance like fire through dry grass. People who had given up hope began to believe again that maybe Earth could be saved. Other submarines that had been hiding in fear came out and started attacking alien ships. The USS Barracuda sank 2 Crithian vessels off the coast of Portugal before vanishing back into the depths. The Russian submarine Kazan destroyed an alien supply convoy in the Arctic waters. The French submarine Pearl coordinated with an Australian boat to trap and kill 3 alien ships near Indonesia. Jack Morrison found himself in a strange new position. He had been a submarine commander driving an old boat to retirement, and now he was coordinating a global underwater war. The submarines could not communicate directly, because the aliens monitored radio frequencies constantly. Instead, they used old methods that had been forgotten in the age of satellites and computers. They left coded messages in waterproof containers at predetermined coordinates on the ocean floor. They used emergency frequencies that changed every day according to patterns only the submarine crews knew. They scratched signals into metal plates and left them where other submarines would find them. Over 2 months, the submarine fleet struck again and again at the alien occupation forces. They learned more about Crithian technology with each attack. The energy shields that protected the alien ships in air and space could not handle the pressure and salt content of Earth's oceans. The shields flickered and failed when the ships went deep, which gave the submarines clear shots at vulnerable hulls. The Crithians had conquered dozens of worlds, but most of those worlds had been dry or had only shallow seas. They had never faced an enemy that lived and fought in the deep ocean. The aliens began to fear the water and changed their tactics. They stopped sending ships below the surface and started hunting submarines aggressively. They filled the oceans with drones and sensors and acoustic devices that tried to find the hidden submarines. Many boats were caught and destroyed. The Barracuda was cornered off the coast of Spain and went down fighting after killing 2 more alien ships. The Kazan led the aliens on a chase through the Arctic ice, but was finally trapped and destroyed when its reactor failed. A Chinese submarine was detected near Japan and obliterated before it could even fire its weapons. But for every submarine that was lost, the fleet claimed more alien ships. They developed new tactics and learned to work together across oceans and languages. They would coordinate attacks so multiple submarines hit different targets at the same time, which confused the aliens and prevented them from responding quickly. They learned to fake their positions by making noise in one place while attacking from another direction. They shared information about alien patrol patterns and ship vulnerabilities and safe hiding spots. The Stingray herself destroyed 6 Crithian vessels and became legendary among the surviving submarines. Her hull was covered in patches and welds from near misses, and her crew worked miracles to keep her running. Amy Carter had become so skilled at reading sonar that she could identify an alien drone from a whale from impossible distances just by the sound it made in the water. Dan Harris kept the ancient reactor operating through sheer determination and mechanical genius that other engineers could not explain. Paul Richards knew every torpedo aboard by name and maintained them like they were his children. But everyone knew they were losing the war slowly. The aliens were adapting and learning, and their technology was getting better at finding submarines. The boats that remained were running low on weapons and fuel and food. The ocean was becoming more dangerous every day as the aliens filled it with sensors and hunter drones. The Stingray's advantage of invisibility was disappearing, and soon the submarines would be as vulnerable as surface ships had been. Jack called a meeting in the cramped wardroom, but this time they had guests. The crew had rescued 3 scientists from a research vessel that was sinking after an alien attack. One of the scientists was Dr. Helen Cross, who studied marine physics and had been analyzing pieces of destroyed alien ships that the Stingray had collected. She sat at the table with Jack and his officers and spread out papers covered in diagrams and equations. Jack told everyone that they could hurt the aliens, but could not beat them with current tactics. The Crithians had hundreds of ships, and the submarine fleet was down to maybe 12 boats. They were running out of torpedoes and spare parts and time. He asked if anyone had ideas for how to change the situation. Helen leaned forward and said she might have found something important. She had been studying the wreckage of alien ships and discovered that all Crithian technology ran on a special kind of energy that was incredibly efficient. The energy came from a central source and was transmitted to all the ships wirelessly. If they could disrupt the power generation at its source, then every alien ship would fail at the same time. All of them everywhere on Earth would just stop working. Amy asked where the power source was located. Helen pulled out a star chart and pointed to a spot above the Pacific Ocean. She said the Crithian command ship stayed in orbit over that location and transmitted power down to all the other vessels. The command ship was massive and probably 10 times larger than the regular alien ships, but it had one weak point. Helen explained that the command ship sent a power relay down to an alien base underwater. The base was in the Mariana Trench, which was the deepest point in Earth's ocean. If they could destroy that relay or damage it enough, then a feedback pulse might travel up through the power network and overload the entire system. Every alien ship might lose power at once. Paul shook his head and said submarines could not reach orbit and could not fight a ship that large, even if they could get there. Helen agreed but said they did not need to reach orbit. They only needed to reach the base in the Mariana Trench and destroy the relay connection. The feedback from the explosion would do the rest. Jack studied the charts and his face was serious. The Mariana Trench was 7 miles deep, and the water pressure there would crush any submarine long before it reached the bottom. The Stingray had been designed to operate at maybe half a mile deep, and even that was pushing her limits. Going to 7 miles was impossible. Dan asked if destroying the relay would actually work or if it was just theory. Helen admitted it was probably 60 or 70% likely to succeed based on her analysis. She could not guarantee it would work, but the physics suggested it should. Paul asked what would happen to the submarine that carried the bombs to the target. Helen met his eyes and her voice was quiet when she answered. She said the submarine would be crushed by the pressure long before it could return to safe depth. The hull would collapse and everyone aboard would die instantly, but if the plan worked, then the explosion might carry enough energy to overload the alien power network and free Earth. The wardroom became completely silent. Dan finally spoke and said they would be delivering a bomb they could not escape from. Helen nodded and said yes, that was exactly right. It was a one-way mission with no chance of survival. Jack looked around at his crew and saw the understanding in their faces. They had fought together for months and survived impossible situations, and now he was being asked to lead them to certain death. He told everyone they would discuss it more and dismissed the meeting. But he knew what choice they would make, because he knew his crew and knew they would never abandon Earth while there was still a chance to save it. That night, Jack walked through the Stingray and talked quietly with each crew member. He explained the mission clearly and told them nobody would think less of them if they refused. It was asking too much to expect people to volunteer for suicide. But one by one, every single member of the crew said they would go. Lisa told Jack that her family was probably dead or enslaved on the surface, and if she could save other families, then her death would mean something. Amy said the old submarine was scheduled for the scrapyard anyway, so they might as well use her for something important. Dan said he had been in the Navy his whole life and could not think of a better way to finish his service than by saving humanity. Jack felt proud and sad and scared all at the same time. He had the best crew any commander could ask for, and he was going to lead every one of them to their deaths. But if it worked, then Earth would be free and billions of people would live. That was worth any price. The USS Stingray began her final journey toward the Mariana Trench, with Dr. Helen Cross working frantically to modify 2 of their last torpedoes. She turned them into resonance bombs that would channel their explosive force directly into the alien power relay. If the bombs detonated at exactly the right point, the feedback should race up the relay at light speed and cascade through the entire Crithian power network. Every ship everywhere would die at once, but only if the theory was correct, and only if they could reach the target before the submarine was crushed. Jack stood in the control room and watched his crew prepare for the descent. They worked quietly and efficiently, and nobody complained or showed fear, even though they all knew they would not survive. Paul checked the modified torpedoes a dozen times to make sure they would function under extreme pressure. Amy calibrated her sonar for the deep trench where sound behaved differently than in normal ocean depths. Dan and his engineering team reinforced every weak point in the hull and welded extra braces wherever they could fit them. The submarine reached the edge of the Mariana Trench, and Jack gave the order to dive. The Stingray tilted downward and began descending into darkness deeper than humans were meant to go. The pressure gauge climbed steadily as they went deeper and deeper into the trench. At 2,000 feet, the hull started making small creaking sounds. At 4,000 feet, those sounds became louder groans. At 6,000 feet, the crew could hear the metal protesting the pressure from every direction. Amy reported contacts on her sonar showing the alien base far below them. The base sat on the ocean floor like a mechanical spider with the power relay rising from its center, like a pillar of pure energy. The relay glowed even in the total darkness of the deep trench and pulsed with barely contained power. It was beautiful and terrible, and represented everything the aliens had used to conquer Earth. Jack ordered them to continue descending, and the Stingray pushed deeper into the trench. At 10,000 feet, small leaks began appearing in the hull and seawater sprayed through tiny cracks. Dan and his team ran from leak to leak, welding patches and tightening seals, but new leaks appeared faster than they could fix them. The submarine was past every safety limit and entering depths where she simply was not designed to survive. At way 15,000 feet, the lights flickered and went out for several seconds before emergency power brought them back. Red warning lights covered every control panel and alarms beeped constantly until Jack ordered them silenced, because the noise was not telling them anything they did not already know. The Stingray was dying slowly, and only the skill of her crew and the quality of her old construction kept her together long enough to reach the target at 20,000 feet. Compartments 3 and 5 began flooding faster than the pumps could handle. Dan reported he could not stop the water and those sections would have to be sealed off. 6 crew members were working in those compartments, and they climbed through the hatches just before the watertight doors were closed and locked. The submarine was smaller now and heavier with the weight of seawater, but she kept descending. Amy called out that they were 4,000 feet from the target. The power relay was directly below them, and they could see it through the cameras as a column of light descending from far above. It connected the alien base on the ocean floor to the command ship in orbit, and through it flowed all the energy that kept Earth enslaved. The target was so close, but the Stingray was falling apart around them. At 23,000 feet, they leveled off, and Jack ordered Paul to prepare the torpedoes for launch. But Paul checked his instruments and shook his head. He reported that the torpedoes would not function at this depth because the pressure would crush their guidance systems before they reached the target. The weapons they needed to save Earth could not survive long enough to do their job. Jack closed his eyes and felt defeat wash over him. They had come so far and sacrificed so much, and now at the final moment they were going to fail. The crew was silent as they realized their mission was impossible, and they were going to die for nothing. The old submarine had done her best, but physics and engineering had limits that courage could not overcome. Then Amy spoke up, and her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. She said they did not need to fire the torpedoes at the target. They just needed to get the weapons close enough to the relay and then detonate them. The Stingray could carry the torpedoes all the way to the relay column if she could hold together just a little longer. Jack understood what she meant. They would pilot the submarine directly into the energy relay and detonate the bombs at point-blank range. The explosion would be massive and would certainly destroy the Stingray instantly, but the crew was already doomed, so dying a few minutes earlier made no difference. At least this way their death would accomplish something. He gave the order to proceed toward the relay, and Dan pushed the failing engines to give one last burst of power. The Stingray moved forward slowly through water so dense it felt like swimming through concrete. The hull screamed in protest and more leaks appeared, but the old submarine refused to quit. She had been scheduled for the scrapyard, but she was going to complete one final mission before she died. 200 yards from the relay, the pressure was unbelievable, and the hull was bending in ways it was never meant to bend. 100 yards. The lights went out completely and the crew worked by feel and memory in total darkness. 50 yards. The power relay filled their view like a wall of pure energy, stretching from the ocean floor to the surface and beyond. Jack ordered the torpedoes released and Paul let them slide free from their tubes. The modified weapons drifted toward the pulsing column of alien power and carried with them the last hope of humanity. Paul activated the detonation timer and reported they had 10 seconds before the bombs exploded. Jack looked around the control room, even though he could not see anything in the darkness. He said it had been an honor serving with his crew, and his voice was calm and proud. They had fought well and made the aliens pay for every inch of Earth they had taken. No one could have asked for a better crew or a better boat. Amy reached out in the darkness and found Jack's hand and held it tight. Around the control room, other crew members did the same and joined together in those final seconds. They were sailors who had gone to sea knowing the ocean might claim them someday, and now that day had come. But they were not dying in defeat. They were dying in victory. The countdown reached 0 and the torpedoes detonated. The explosion was beyond anything the crew could have imagined. The modified warheads channeled every bit of their energy directly into the alien relay, and the effect was instantaneous. The relay overloaded and feedback raced upward at light speed, carrying destruction through the entire Crithian power network. In orbit above Earth, the command ship erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the night sky. The explosion cascaded through the power transmission system, and every alien ship everywhere began losing power. Their shields failed and their weapons went dark and their engines stopped. The occupation ended in one brilliant flash of light. The Stingray was caught in the blast wave and the pressure crushed her hull like paper. The submarine imploded in microseconds and the crew felt no pain. They simply ceased to exist in the instant between one heartbeat and the next. The old boat and her brave crew disappeared into the deepest trench in the deepest ocean and became part of the darkness there, forever. On the surface, freed humans looked up to see alien ships falling from the sky like metal rain. The ships crashed into cities and oceans and mountains, and their crews died inside them. The mighty Crithian empire that had conquered Earth in days was broken and destroyed by a single old submarine and her crew of ordinary people who refused to surrender. At first, humans did not know what had happened. They just knew the aliens were dying and the occupation was ending. But eventually the story spread about the USS Stingray and Commander Jack Morrison and Lieutenant Amy Carter and Chief Dan Harris and Lieutenant Paul Richards and Petty Officer Lisa Grant and all the crew who had given everything to save Earth. People built monuments to honor them and told stories about their courage. Children learned their names in school and sailors spoke of them with reverence. The Stingray had been scheduled for the scrapyard, but instead she became legend. She had been old and slow and obsolete, but when Earth needed her most, she and her crew had done the impossible. Humanity had been brought to its knees by aliens with superior technology and overwhelming force. But submarines do not kneel. They dive deep into the darkness and they strike without warning, and they never give up, no matter what the odds. The Stingray had taught the universe that lesson, and Earth was free because of it. In the Mariana Trench 7 miles below the surface, the wreckage of the submarine rested on the ocean floor. The pressure that had crushed her would keep her there forever untouched and undisturbed. It was a fitting grave for a boat and crew that had saved the world. They had gone into the deep on a mission they could not survive, and they had succeeded beyond all hope. The war was over, and humanity remembered.